The gravel in my driveway made a sound I hadn't heard in 3 days. It was 11:47 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the Uber driver didn't say a word as I pulled my overnight bag from the back seat. I stood there for a moment before I even looked at the house. The doctor had signed my discharge papers 2 days earlier than expected. My heart, he said, was stronger than the tests had suggested. I should have been relieved. I should have walked straight to my front door with nothing but gratitude in my chest. Instead, I stood at the edge of my own property and stared at the second-floor window of my mother's bedroom, because the curtains were drawn, and my mother never drew her curtains during the day. Not once in the 11 years she had lived with me. She said darkness made her feel like she was already in a coffin. Those were her exact words. She had a flair for the dramatic, my mother, even at 81 years old, even with the dementia slowly taking pieces of her. The curtains were drawn. I told myself it meant nothing. I picked up my bag and walked to the front door. The smell hit me before the silence did. It was stale air, the kind that collects in a room when no windows have been opened, and no meals have been cooked, and no one has been paying attention. It was the smell of a house that had been abandoned by the people still living in it. I set my bag down in the entryway and listened. Nothing from upstairs, a low hum from the television in the den, but the volume was turned so far down I could barely hear it. My daughter's car was parked in the garage. I had seen it when the Uber pulled in. I called out her name. No answer. I called out again, louder, and this time I heard movement above me. A door. Footsteps that were too quick, too deliberate. The footsteps of someone who had been startled. My daughter appeared at the top of the stairs. She was 34 years old, and she had her mother's eyes and my stubbornness. And in that moment she looked at me the way you look at something you were not expecting to see. Not happy surprise. The other kind. "Dad," she said, I thought you weren't coming home until Thursday." "They discharged me early," I said. "Where's your grandmother?" She came down 2 steps. "She's resting. She had a rough night." "Open her curtains," I said. "Dad, she's sleeping." "Open her curtains," I said again. And something in my voice must have reached her, because she turned and went back upstairs without another word. I followed her. My mother was lying in her bed with the covers pulled to her chin, even though it was nearly noon and the room was warm. Her lips were cracked. There was a glass of water on the nightstand, but when I touched it, it was empty and had been empty long enough for the inside of the glass to dry. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand, and her eyes opened slowly, and she looked at me for a long moment before she recognized me. "Robert," she said. Her voice was paper-thin. "I'm here," I said. "When did she last give you water?" My mother's eyes moved to my daughter, who was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. Then she looked back at me. "I asked," she said quietly. "I asked a few times." I didn't say anything. I picked up the empty glass and carried it to the bathroom and filled it and brought it back and held it while my mother drank. She drank the whole glass. I filled it again and she drank half of that. Then I pulled her blankets straight and told her I was going to make her something to eat. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator. The container of soup I had prepared before my hospitalization was still there, untouched. I had made enough for 4 days. I had labeled it with the date and my mother's name written in black marker, the way I always did, because her condition sometimes confused her about what was hers. The soup had not been heated once in 3 days. The fruit I had cut and portioned into small containers was still there too, exactly as I had left it, the apple slices brown at the edges now. My daughter was leaning against the kitchen doorframe. She said she wasn't hungry, she said. I turned on the burner under the pot and did not answer her. "Dad, she has good days and bad days. You know that. Yesterday she refused to eat breakfast and I couldn't force her." "You could have called me," I said. "You were in the hospital." I had my phone. Silence. I stirred the soup and tried to arrange what I was feeling into something manageable. I had been married for 31 years before my wife passed. I had raised my daughter mostly on my own after that. I had driven her to piano lessons and helped her through calculus and paid for 4 years of college and 2 years of graduate school. I had done all of it without being asked, without keeping score, without once making her feel like she owed me anything. And I had spent the last 11 years building a life that could accommodate my mother's illness, converting the second bedroom, hiring a part-time aide 3 days a week, learning the routines that kept her calm, and eating and hydrated. 3 days. I had been gone 3 days for a medical emergency I did not choose, and my daughter had let my 81-year-old mother with dementia go without water. I carried the soup upstairs on a tray with crackers and a fresh glass of water and a small bowl of applesauce. My mother ate slowly. She asked me twice if I was really home and not a dream. I told her I was really home both times. She patted my hand and said, "Good." When I came back downstairs, my daughter was on her phone. She put it face down on the counter when she saw me. "I need you to tell me honestly what these 3 days looked like," I said. "I took care of her, Dad. I checked on her." "How many times a day did you check on her?" "I don't know. Regularly." "Did you call Dr. Harmon's office like I asked you to confirm her Thursday appointment?" A pause. "I forgot." "Did you give her the evening medication on Monday?" Another pause. Longer. She was already asleep when I remembered. I sat down at the kitchen table. My daughter remained standing. She was twisting her wedding ring around her finger, which she did when she was nervous, which I recognized because I had watched her do it since she was 22 years old and anxious about her first real job interview. "Where was Kevin these 3 days?" I asked. Kevin was her husband. He had a face that was pleasant when it needed to be and a handshake that was too firm in the way of men who practiced it. "He was here some of the time," she said. "Some of the time. He has work, Dad. We both have lives." I did not say what I was thinking. I said I was tired and needed to rest, and I went upstairs and lay down on my bed with my eyes open and stared at the ceiling until I heard my daughter leave. I heard her say goodbye to my mother through the closed door, very briefly, the way you say goodbye to an obligation rather than a person. Then I heard her car reverse out of the garage. I gave it 10 minutes. Then I got up and went to the small office at the end of the hall. 3 months earlier, I had installed a home security system. I had done it quietly, and I had not made a production of it, because I am a retired electrical engineer, and I understand that the value of surveillance is partly in its invisibility. There were 4 cameras, one at the front door, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the upstairs hallway, angled to cover the door to my mother's room. I had told my daughter about the front door camera, because that one was obvious. I had not mentioned the others. I sat down at my desk and opened the monitoring software on my laptop. What I watched over the next 2 hours changed something in me that has not entirely healed since. The first morning, Monday, my daughter had come downstairs at 9:43. She had made coffee. She had sat at the kitchen table with her phone for 40 minutes. She had then gone back upstairs, and the hallway camera showed her pausing at my mother's door, putting her hand on the knob, and then letting go without opening it. She had gone back to the guest room, which she had apparently been using, and that door had stayed closed until 11:15. She had come out briefly, gone downstairs, returned with a plate of food for herself, and gone back into the guest room. My mother's door had opened at 12:30, not because my daughter opened it, because my mother, in her slippers and her nightgown, had shuffled out into the hallway and stood there looking confused. She had called out my daughter's name, and then my name, and then a name I didn't recognize, probably someone from decades ago, someone her mind had retrieved from a drawer that the present couldn't reach. She had stood in the hallway for 11 minutes. Then she had shuffled back into her room. My daughter had not come out of the guest room. On Tuesday, the pattern was similar, except that Kevin arrived at 2 in the afternoon. I watched him come in through the front door, carrying a bag from a fast food restaurant. He and my daughter ate together in the kitchen. At 3:30, my daughter went upstairs and opened my mother's door. She brought in a glass of water. She was inside for less than 4 minutes. She came back out and rejoined Kevin in the living room. 4 minutes. I sat with that for a while. Then I kept watching. And what I saw next was not about my mother at all. At 4:15 on Tuesday afternoon, Kevin had gone into my office. Not for something innocent, not to use the printer or find a pen. He had sat down at the desk, my desk, the desk where I kept my financial files organized in labeled folders, and he had spent 40 minutes going through papers. Methodically, the camera angle wasn't perfect, but I could see him picking up documents, photographing them with his phone, replacing them. He was careful. Careful enough to put things back where he found them, careful enough that I would not have noticed anything out of place if I had walked in afterward. My hands were very still on the keyboard. I rewound the footage and watched it again. Then I went to the filing cabinet and checked what was in it. My retirement account statements, the deed to the house, my late wife's life insurance settlement documents, the trust documents I had set up 2 years ago, the investment portfolio summaries. All of it. He had photographed all of it. I sat at my desk for a long time that evening. My mother slept. The house was quiet. I was 63 years old, and I had spent 40 years building a life with my hands and my mind. And my daughter's husband had spent 40 minutes photographing the architecture of everything I owned. I did not call my daughter. I did not call Kevin. I was careful in a different way than Kevin had been careful. I was careful the way you are careful when you understand that the moment you show your hand, you lose. The next morning, I called my attorney. His name was Gerald Patterson, and I had known him for 22 years, and he had handled my wife's estate and my own will revisions, and he was the kind of man who listened more than he talked. I told him what I had found on the footage. I told him about the papers Kevin had photographed. I told him about my mother's condition and what the cameras had shown me about her care over those 3 days. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you have more footage?" "I have everything from the past 3 days," I said. "Keep it. Back it up. Don't tell them about the cameras." He paused. "Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it carefully. In the last few months, has your daughter said anything to you about power of attorney? About your estate? About your health?" I thought about it. She mentioned, about 2 months ago, that I should make sure my end-of-life documents were in order. She said it very casually. I thought she was being thoughtful. Has she mentioned a name? An attorney she recommended? Someone who could help you update your will? I felt something cold move through me. "She gave me a business card," I said slowly, "about 6 weeks ago. Said he was very good, very reasonable. I put it in my desk drawer and forgot about it." "Find that card," Gerald said. "And then don't do anything. Just watch." "Can you do that?" I said I could. I spent the next 2 weeks watching. I was home now, so it was different. I couldn't watch them freely in the house, but I could watch what came into the mail and what happened when I wasn't in the room, and I could watch the cameras during the hours when I was supposedly asleep or out running errands. My daughter called 3 times that first week. She was warm and attentive in a way that felt calibrated. She asked about my health. She asked about my mother. She asked if I had thought any more about putting my mother in a memory care facility, which she said she had done some research on, and which I recognized as a conversation we had had before that I had ended by saying my mother would die in her home. She asked this time with more persistence. She mentioned cost. She mentioned stress. She mentioned what it was doing to my heart, taking care of my mother at my age, with my condition. I listened carefully and said I would think about it. On a Thursday, 2 weeks after I came home from the hospital, I was washing dishes when my mother came into the kitchen and sat at the table. She was having a clear day, one of the good ones where she was present and sharp and funny in the way she had always been funny, which was dry and a little mean, and I loved it. She watched me dry the plates and stack them. "Your daughter called me this morning," she said. I turned around. "Called you on what?" My mother held up the small phone I kept in her room for emergencies. For the rare occasions she wanted to reach out to someone without coming to find me. She wanted to talk to me alone. She said not to tell you. I set down the dish towel. I sat across from her. What did she want to talk about? My mother's eyes were clear and direct. She wanted to know if I thought you were well enough to be making decisions on your own. She used very careful words, the way you do when you want someone to agree with something without knowing they're agreeing. She paused. "I'm 81 years old, Robert. I have dementia. I'm not stupid." I reached across the table and took her hand. She asked if I thought you forgot things, if you seemed confused sometimes, if I ever worried about you. She looked at me steadily. I told her you were the sharpest person I knew and that she should be so lucky to have your mind at 63. I squeezed her hand. I didn't trust my voice. "What's happening?" she asked. I told her. Not everything. Not in the way I would have told someone who could hold all the details, but enough. I told her that I thought my daughter and Kevin were trying to position themselves to control my finances, and that I was working with my attorney to understand what was happening. My mother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Sandra always wanted more than what was hers. She was like that as a child, too. I never said anything because she was your daughter and you loved her, but she has always wanted more than what was hers." That night, I called Gerald and told him about the phone call to my mother. He was very quiet for a moment. "Robert," he said, "I need you to listen carefully. I did some checking on the attorney whose card your daughter gave you. He specializes in guardianship proceedings. He has filed guardianship petitions on behalf of adult children against elderly parents 7 times in the past 4 years. 3 of those cases resulted in the adult child being granted legal and financial authority over the parent." The silence in my house felt different after that. Denser. Guardianship. The word settled into me like a stone into water. If they succeeded, if they could convince a court that I was impaired, confused, unfit to manage my own affairs, they would control everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it, with my name on it but their hands on the keys. And my mother. They would put my mother in a facility the first week. "What do I do?" I asked. "You build your case before they build theirs," Gerald said, "and then you let them make their move." I spent the next 3 weeks building my case. It required patience I had not known I had. I continued behaving normally around my daughter, taking her calls, accepting her invitations to dinner, allowing Kevin to shake my hand with that grip of his and make conversation about football teams I didn't care about. I was pleasant. I was slightly distracted. I mentioned my heart once or twice, in ways that I knew they would notice. I let them believe the picture they were drawing. Meanwhile, I was pulling the threads. Gerald helped me obtain documents through formal channels. It turned out that 6 weeks before my hospitalization, my daughter had contacted the attorney on that business card. She had requested a consultation about initiating a guardianship proceeding against a parent she described as showing signs of cognitive decline. She had provided supporting examples. She had asked how long the process typically took. 6 weeks before my hospitalization, while I was driving my mother to her appointments and managing my own health and paying the bills on time and doing everything I had always done, my daughter was in a law office describing me as cognitively declining. Kevin had been meticulous about the financial documents he photographed in my office because they were building a case. They needed to know what there was and what it was worth before they moved to take control of it. I pulled the footage from the security cameras and compiled it carefully, the neglect during my 3 days in the hospital, the 40 minutes Kevin had spent in my office, the systematic documentation of someone planning not a visit but an acquisition. I had my own doctor provide a written assessment of my cognitive function, which was entirely normal. I had 3 colleagues from my career engineers. Methodical men write letters about my sharpness and my competence. I documented my mother's care. The aide schedule, the medical appointments, the medication logs I had kept for 2 years in a notebook by the kitchen phone. Gerald filed documents with the court before my daughter's attorney could. Then we waited. My daughter called on a Saturday morning in October, 3 months after I had come home from the hospital. Her voice was warm and careful, the calibrated warmth I had come to recognize. She said she and Kevin were coming for Sunday dinner, and there was something they wanted to talk to me about. She said it was important. She said she hoped I would keep an open mind. I said, of course. I said I would make the pot roast. I called Gerald from my office with the door closed. Then I called a man named Detective Brian Cowell at the County Elder Financial Crimes Unit, with whom Gerald had arranged an introduction 3 weeks earlier. Then I called my mother's aide, Patricia, who had been with us for 4 years and who had seen enough of Kevin and my daughter to have formed clear opinions about both of them, and I told her what I needed. Sunday dinner. I made the pot roast. I set the table. My mother sat at her usual chair at the end, and she was having a clear day, and she was wearing the blue cardigan that made her look like herself. I heard Kevin's car in the driveway at 6, and I stood at the stove and breathed slowly and waited. They came in with the easy confidence of people who believe a situation is already decided. Kevin clapped me on the shoulder. My daughter kissed my cheek and said the house smelled wonderful, and went to say hello to my mother. I watched them settle into the furniture that had been in my family for decades, as if they were already measuring it for transport. We ate dinner. The conversation was light. Kevin talked about a project at work. My daughter asked about my mother's last doctor's appointment. I answered everything simply and let the silences be comfortable. I did not rush anything. I had learned patience. After dinner, I cleared the plates and brought out coffee. My daughter put her hand flat on the table in a gesture that I recognized as the one she had practiced, the one that said, "I am about to say something difficult, but necessary." "Dad," she said, "Kevin and I have been worried about you." "I know," I said. That surprised her. She glanced at Kevin. "You know?" "I know you've been worried," I said. "Tell me what's on your mind." She had prepared this. I could hear the preparation in it. She talked about my heart condition, about the stress of caring for my mother, about the responsibility of managing a large estate alone at my age. She was gentle. She was concerned. She did not use the word guardianship. She used phrases like getting some help and sharing the burden and making sure everything is protected. Kevin nodded at intervals. I let her finish. "I appreciate that," I said. "It means a lot that you care about me." I paused. "I want to show you something." I went to my office and came back with my laptop. I set it on the table between them. The security footage was already queued. "I came home from the hospital early," I said, "and I found some things." I watched my daughter's face change as she recognized the kitchen. The timestamp was visible in the corner. Monday morning, 9:43. She watched herself make coffee and sit at the table with her phone and not go upstairs. "Dad, keep watching," I said. She watched herself pause at my mother's door and not open it. She watched her mother-in-law shuffle alone into the hallway and stand there confused and call out names and return to a room with no water. Kevin's jaw was tight. I scrolled to Tuesday afternoon. Kevin recognized himself the moment he appeared on the screen. I watched his face do something complicated that it couldn't quite complete. "That is my office," I said. "Those are my financial documents. That is 41 minutes of you photographing the contents of my filing cabinet with your phone." I paused. "I would like those photographs deleted. Gerald Patterson is my attorney. He has already filed the relevant documentation with the court regarding the guardianship consultation you had in August. He has also filed the footage of my mother's care during my hospitalization with the Elder Services Unit." My daughter had gone very still. "I had my cognitive function evaluated 3 weeks ago," I continued. "I have a full written assessment from Dr. Meredith Hayes, who is board certified in neurology, confirming that I am entirely competent. I have financial records demonstrating that I manage my affairs without error. I have 2 years of documented care logs for your grandmother." I closed the laptop. I am not declining. I am not confused. I am not someone who can be maneuvered. Kevin stood up. "Sit down," I said, not loudly, but something in my voice landed correctly because he sat. "What happens now?" my daughter asked. Her voice was very small, not the calibrated warmth anymore. Something underneath that. "That depends," I said, "on whether you are willing to accept the consequences of what you've done or whether you want to contest them." I learned later that Gerald had already been in contact with the attorney whose card my daughter had given me. That attorney withdrew from any potential proceeding within a week. The photographs on Kevin's phone were deleted under a legal agreement, with documentation. My daughter was required to complete a formal interview with the Elder Services Unit regarding my mother's care during those 3 days, and the findings were entered into a record that would matter if anything like this was ever attempted again. They did not come to Sunday dinner anymore. For a long time, I did not know how to hold what had happened. She was my daughter. I had held her when she was 6 hours old. I had watched her sleep in the hospital bassinet and felt the particular terror of loving someone that much. The knowledge that you would do anything, give anything, to keep them safe. 34 years of that. And somewhere in those 34 years, without my noticing, she had become someone who could photograph my financial documents, while her grandmother went without water in the next room. My mother asked me about her once, about 6 weeks after the Sunday dinner. We were sitting on the back porch in the late afternoon, the October light coming through the maple. And she said, "Do you hear from Sandra?" I said I didn't. Not really. A few texts. Nothing with substance. My mother was quiet for a moment. When she was small, she said, she used to climb into my lap and put her head under my chin, like she was trying to disappear into me. I thought it was sweetness. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. I think now it was something else. Something that was always looking for something to hold on to and not caring too much where it found it. I didn't answer. I watched the maple. Forgiveness is not the same as trust, my mother said. I have forgiven your father for a great many things. I never trusted him with money again. She looked at me sideways. You understand the difference. I understood the difference. I changed the locks in November. Not out of anger, practically, because Kevin had a key, and the time for that had passed. I updated my estate documents with Gerald, establishing clear and detailed provisions, with a professional fiduciary named as executor rather than a family member. I made sure my mother's care was formalized in writing, with Patricia's role and hours documented and a secondary arrangement in place in case of emergency. I left nothing to assumption. I also bought my mother a small radio for her room. She liked the classical station that played in the evenings. She said it helped her sleep, and on the nights I walked past her door, I could hear it, faint and steady, and I thought that this ordinary sound in this ordinary house was the thing I had been protecting. Not the accounts, or the deed, or the portfolio. People sometimes ask, when they hear stories like mine, whether I wish I had handled it differently, whether I wish I had confronted my daughter sooner, or more gently, or not at all. I understand the question. I spent time with it myself. Here's what I know. There is a version of this story where I never came home early, where I was discharged on Thursday as expected and walked into a house where everything had been straightened and my mother had been given water and the filing cabinet was exactly as I had left it and I never knew, where my daughter's warmth remained calibrated and useful and I spent the next several years slowly handing over the controls of my life, one small accommodation at a time, each one reasonable on its own, until one day I looked up and nothing was mine anymore. I came home on a Tuesday instead of a Thursday. The gravel crunched under the tires and my mother's curtains were drawn and I followed that thread all the way to the end. I do not think luck is the right word for it. I think some part of me, some part that had been paying attention longer than I knew, recognized the shape of what was happening before my conscious mind caught up. I think that part of me is what kept me from calling my daughter when I first saw the footage, what kept me patient and methodical and careful through 3 months of building and waiting and watching. My mother is 82 now. She has more bad days than good days, and the good days are shorter than they used to be. But she is in her home. She eats her meals. Patricia brings her tulips on Fridays because my mother once mentioned she liked them, and Patricia remembered. My mother calls me by the wrong name sometimes, and sometimes she reaches for people who are not in the room. But she is not alone. She is not thirsty. She is not lying in the dark wondering why no one comes. That is what I built my life around. That is what I protected. If you are watching this and you have a parent who is aging, or a parent who is ill, or a parent who depends on someone to be present, pay attention. Not to the warmth, to what is underneath it. Love and strategy can look identical from the outside. The difference is what happens when no one is watching. The difference is whether the curtains are open or closed. I know the answer to that question now. I keep it with me, and I would ask you if you were in my position, if you had seen what I saw on that footage, if you had heard what your mother told you she had been asked on that phone call, would you have done the same? Or would you have chosen the easier version, the one where you don't look too closely, where the warmth is enough, where you tell yourself that family means the best is always intended? Leave your answer below. I read every one.